Well, again, welcome everyone. My name is Kira and my pronouns are she, her. I'll be your host for this members class, IFS and Compassion with Dr. Richard Schwartz. I'm joining you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Sitlaks Okanagan people, also known as West Kelowna, BC, Canada. As our community gathers today from various corners of the globe, we would like to acknowledge that the land we live, work, and play on is the traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples, and we respectfully honor their people, cultures, and traditions. Now it's with my pleasure to introduce Dr. Richard Schwartz. I'm just going to add a little spotlight. So Dr. Richard Schwartz is the creator of Internal Family Systems, a highly effective evidence-based therapeutic model that depathologizes the multi-part personality. His IFS Institute offers training for professionals and the general public. He is currently on faculty of Harvard Medical School and has published 5 books, including No Bad Parts, Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems Model. Dick lives with his wife, Jean, near Chicago, close to his 3 daughters and his growing number of grandchildren. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Richard.
Hey, thank you, Kira, and welcome everybody. Just so I have a sense of what to talk about, and I see maybe a third of you, but just raise your hand if you don't know much about IFS. Okay. Oh, okay, so I see 3 people. All right, so I'll give a brief intro, and then I'll focus more on compassion, because I think that's the topic today. And we'll probably do at least one exercise in the hour and a half. So you'll get to know a part of you, at least one. And like that, then we'll do Q&A. So yeah, so this is the 40th anniversary of my journey on this this trail of figuring out how the mind works. And so to introduce it, I'm going to go back in time to that time 40 years ago, where I was a obnoxious family therapist. I had a PhD in that, and I thought family therapy had discovered the Holy Grail, and that we didn't need to muck around in the internal world, and the people that did that were wasting their time, because we could change all that simply by reorganizing these external families. And decided to prove that by doing an outcome study with kids who had bulimia, and gathered together 30 of those kids with a colleague named Mary Jo Barrett, and found that my prophecy failed, because I could reorganize the families just the way the book said to, and still a bunch of my clients at least didn't realize they'd been cured, and they kept binging and purging. And so out of frustration, I began asking why, and they started talking this language of parts, which was pretty foreign to me at the time, because I, like most everybody, still thinks that there's just one mind that has different emotions and thoughts, but you just have one mind in there. But they were talking about these parts as if they had a lot of autonomy and could do things like take over and make them do things they didn't want to do, and they had relationships with each other. And so at first I got scared and thought, maybe these kids are sicker than I thought. Maybe they have multiple personality disorder. And then I started listening inside myself, and oh my God, I've got them too. And some of mine are as extreme about the issues as theirs. And so then I calmed down and got curious, but I was making the same mistake that most of our field still makes, in assuming they were what they seemed, so that the critic was an internalized parental voice, and the binge was just an out of control impulse, and so on. And when you think of them that way, you're limited in how you have your client relate to them, because I was having my client stand up to the critic and argue with it and try to control the binge. And they were getting worse, but I didn't know what else to do until my first client, who not only had a bulimia issue, but also cut herself and insisted on showing me the open wounds every session. And that was driving me crazy. So I decided one session, and by then I'd heard about this empty chair technique from Gestalt therapy. And so I would have that cutting part in a chair across from me and the client, and we would just be badgering it for the 2-hour session until it finally agreed not to cut her that week. And then I opened the door of the next session and she had a big gash down the side of her face. And that was a turning point in the history of this model, because I shifted out of that coercive place to just getting curious. So, sort of spontaneously, I just said, it came out of my mouth, it was, why do you do this to her? And in response, the part described its secret history of how it had to protect her this way when she was a child, and had to contain the rage that would get her more abuse, and it had several different reasons for having to do this. As I listened to that, now I wasn't just curious, but I had a kind of compassion for and appreciation for the heroic role it played in her life. And I could convey that to this part, and the part broke into tears because everyone had vilified it and tried to get rid of it. Finally, somebody was listening to it. And so that was, like I said, a turning point in the history of this work, because from that point on, I mainly got curious about and helped my clients get curious about these parts. And when you do that, you will learn their secret histories of how they were forced into these roles, how much they don't like the roles they're in, but how much they believe they're necessary to protect the client. So that's the basic story of how I got into being interested in parts, what I call parts, other systems call subpersonalities or ego states. But for me, parts are sacred inner beings. We come with them into the world, and they all are valuable. They all have helpful roles to play in our lives. So they're not created by trauma. There's a lot of assumptions about these things that turn out not to be true. It's the natural state of the mind to be multiple this way. One mind couldn't do everything we have to survive and thrive. So we have many, many minds, all of whom have valuable qualities to help us in our lives. But trauma and attachment injuries and the slings and arrows force these parts out of their naturally valuable states into roles that can be damaging, but they think are necessary, and freeze them in time during the trauma. So if you were to ask many of these protective parts how old they think you are, you'll get a single digit. And they think you're still 5 years old, and they think they still have to protect you the way they did when you were 5. And they all carry what we're going to call burdens, which is a central concept in IFS. Definition of which is an extreme belief or emotion that came into your system from a trauma or something like it, and then get grafted into these parts, almost like a virus, and then organize the way the part operates thereafter. So good parts forced into these extreme roles, carrying burdens, extreme beliefs and emotions, frozen in time. So that's the state of most of your clients when they come in. They're being run by these different parts. And as a systems guy, a family therapist, I was very interested in trying to map this inner territory. And so I was looking for distinctions, and the big distinction that leaped out immediately was between parts that before they were hurt would be these lovely, delightful, playful inner children that are so creative and we love to be with. But after they get hurt, because they're the most sensitive parts of us, they take on the most powerful burdens of worthlessness or terror or emotional pain. And once they carry those burdens, and once they get frozen in those scenes, we don't want anything to do with them, because they have the power to overwhelm us with their feelings and pull us back into those times. And so we almost naturally try to exile them, in my language, and lock them in inner basements or abysses, and just spend as much of our life as we can staying away from them, not realizing that we're moving away from and abandoning our most precious qualities, the most precious parts, simply because they got hurt, thinking we're just moving on from the trauma and obeying what our culture tells us to do, which is to just let it go and don't look back and just move on. So most all of us come out of our families with a bunch of exiled parts, not only because of traumas, but also certain parts in most families aren't accepted very well. And the rules of the family don't allow for them. So you wind up locking those up too. So we have a bunch of exiles. And once you have a bunch of exiles, you feel more delicate and the world seems more dangerous, because so many different things could trigger those parts. And if they get triggered, it's like these flames of raw emotion come bursting forth and threaten to overwhelm you and make you sit in bed for a week. So to deal with that, many other parts are forced out of their naturally valuable states to become protectors. And some protectors are trying to manage your life so that you don't get triggered. So they'll try to manage your relationships so no one gets close enough to hurt you again, or manage your appearance so that you don't get rejected and you look perfect all the time, or manage your performance so you get a lot of accolades to counter the worthlessness, or make you take care of everybody else so they depend on you, but they don't let you take care of yourself, or keep you in your head all the time so that you don't feel much in your body and you're thinking constantly. So those are just some of the common manager roles that most of us have some version of, and it's often called the ego. But they're just a bunch of often young themselves parts that are in over their head. They're what in family therapy we would call parentified children. They're parentified inner children, because they're not equipped to run your life, even though they're forced to do that. So we've all got a bunch of managers, and it doesn't always work. The world has a way of breaking through those defenses and triggering your exiles, at which point it's a big emergency because it feels like you're going to die sometimes. And so other parts are standing by and immediately go into action in often extreme ways to try and deal with these flames of emotion that have come exploding out of your inner basements, and often do it in impulsive ways, because they don't care about the collateral damage to your body or to your relationships. They just know they've got to get you away from that right now, whatever it takes. And so we call them firefighters. And we all generally have a bunch of firefighters. And some of us are dominated by our firefighters, and some of us have got them all locked up. But but they're there. And again, they're just trying to help in their own way. So that was the map that came to me 40 years ago and has held up as a very useful map all these 40 years. Very simple, got exiled parts. And when you have a bunch of exiles, you have to have a bunch of protectors, some of whom are managers and others are firefighters. So those are parts. But the bigger discovery, for lack of a better word, of IFS, is that in addition to all of those parts, there is an essence in everyone that knows how to heal them, knows how to lead inside. And I just stumbled onto this discovery as I was exploring all this, because once I got hip to the fact that parts weren't what they seemed and they deserved to be listened to, I began trying to get clients to listen, let's say to their critic, for example, because we might do something with that today. And so I would have my client initially in that open chair way, but then one client said, I don't have to sit, I don't have to move around the room. I can just sit here and do it. And ever since then, we just sit there and do it. Have a client try to listen to her critic rather than fight with it. So I'm trying to get that to happen. And suddenly she's furious with the critic. And it reminded me of family sessions where I'm trying to have two family members talk to each other and listen to each other who've been polarized. And then a third family member jumps in and makes it go south. And so I started thinking maybe there's some third part coming in, interfering in the relationship between my client and the critic, making her hate the critic. I'd say to clients, could you get that one to give us a little space and maybe just relax back in there, step back. To my amazement, clients could do it. And once they did, it was like a different person emerged spontaneously who would say some version of, I'm just kind of curious why it calls me names. Seconds earlier, they hated it or they were terrified of it. But I got that to open space and separate. Suddenly they're not only curious, but calm relative to it, confident relative to it, and even compassionate. They'd say some version of, I feel sorry that it has to do this all day. It can't be fun. And in that state, the critic would relax and would open up and would share how it got into the role and where it was stuck in the past. And there was a lot we could do with that. And when I would try the same process with other clients of simply getting parts to open space, it was like the same person would pop out with those same C-word qualities of calm, confidence, curiosity, and compassion. And then four more, which are creativity, courage, clarity, and connectedness. So those we call the 8 C's of self leadership, because when I would ask clients, what part of you is that? That's great, let's keep that around. They'd say some version of, that's not a part like these others, that's me, that's myself. So I came to call that the self with a capital S. And that's the big deal about IFS, that self is in everybody, can't be damaged, knows how to heal, both internally and externally, and is just beneath the surface of these parts such that when they open space, it comes out and comes out fully formed because it can't be damaged. And so for me, it's become a much more spiritual kind of concept that this self is, if you saw Oppenheimer, you heard about quantum physics and particle and wave. So this is a particle, what I'm calling self, of the big wave of big self, God somehow. That's what it's come to be for me. which is the only way I could explain how it would emerge fully formed, even in people with horrible, horrible histories. Because if you believe basic attachment theory, you believe that's not possible, that you can only have those qualities if you had some kind of loving relationship at some point in your life. So this is very different than most attachment-based models, because I'm here to say that, and this today's the topic is compassion, that you don't have to build up the muscle of compassion. You don't have to do exercises to have compassion. You don't have to have your client try to be compassionate. It's inherent in us. And all you need to do is uncover it, because it's in there. And by uncover it, I simply mean get these protective parts to allow it to come forward. So that's a very different paradigm than most others about compassion. And so that's one of the big C words among these 8 that is, and you know, there were other qualities that would manifest when people would access this place, like joy or perspective, or, you know, I could go on and on, but those 8 C's are the ones that are most relevant to the healing process. So those are the ones we focus on the most when we do therapy. So again, that's the big deal about IFS, that all that's in there. And that allows you to really enjoy being a therapist, because it takes the onus off of you of having to be that good parental attachment figure for your client, because that figure is inside of them. And your job becomes helping them access that, and then helping them go to work to heal their own parts. So, so let me think if I want to say anything else about IFS at this point. Yeah, I think that's enough to pause here. And Kira, maybe take some questions.
Sure, that's great. If anyone would like to post a question in the Q&A or raise their hand, we can take questions that way. And I'll open the chat. All right, so we do just have a question. Mukesh, I hope I'm saying that right. They ask, seems like a combination of structural, self, and family therapy. Is that right?
Structural and what?
Self and family therapy.
I don't know what self means, but
Maybe
yeah.
personal?
What?
I'm not sure.
But yeah, I was trained primarily as a structural family therapist. And so a lot of it is an overlay of structural family therapy onto this inner system. So in structural family therapy, we were looking at polarizations and alliances in families and enmeshments and then trying to help all that change. So, and it turns out that you really have a lot of the same kinds of structures in these internal families.
Interesting. Okay, so I have a couple questions. I have one from Gloria. Has it been found any specific psychedelic therapies help access these parts more than others? Say ketamine, MDMA, etc. Any access the essence easier?
You know, my main experience is with ketamine, and so I'm very excited about the combination, and as are a lot of people now, of ketamine and IFS, because for whatever reason, and this I think is also true of some of the others, the medicine helps protectors relax and sometimes totally go to sleep. And that allows for a lot of self to emerge very quickly.
Mm.
And that then becomes a big invitation for a lot of exiled parts to come and get attention. And if you're facilitating and you know that that's the case, then when your psychedelic subject starts to have a panic attack, you don't panic because you know that's an exile that's just come in. And then you help that exile separate a little bit, and then you help your client heal that part. So it's become a very popular map to the psychedelic territory. I presented a keynote at the big MAPS conference in Denver I guess a month ago now. And I was very happy to see how widespread IFS has become in that community. So.
Great. He, I hope that I'm pronouncing that right, is asking, what are some ways in which the therapist can help make space for the client to encounter their parts, engage with the protector parts, and allow the self to be more alive and expressed?
A lot of times it's pretty simple. And as I say, we'll do an exercise shortly where you can experience it. The degree to which clients resist often is very related to the degree to which you as a therapist are in self versus in certain other parts that will trigger their protectors. So if I can bring a lot of self to any situation, like I did a demo with a comparable group with Kira not too long ago, and immediately I think the client sensed the safety of my presence, and my reputation, comes before me too. But we did a huge piece of work because of the sense the protectors have of the safety. If I can be in those C words, especially confidence. So a lot of how much luck you're going to have with this model has to do with how much work you're going to do with your protective parts so that they can trust you to be with your clients, rather than these what we call self-like managers that many therapists lead their therapy from.
Really interesting. I think it's Jania Guerra is asking, how do you help your clients connect and identify their parts when first starting IFS with them? I think that might have just been answered in your last question, but you feel free.
I could elaborate. So client comes in, they tell me about their problem. I start asking, when you have the problem, what comes up inside of you? What kind of thoughts do you have? What kind of emotions? As they're telling me all that, I'm feeding back what they're saying, as all of you learn to do as therapists. But I'm adding the phrase, so one part of you says this to you, and another part of you does this inside of you. Is that right? And clients generally don't say, what are you talking about, parts? They'll say, yeah, that's right. Whereas if I was to say, so one of your ego states does this, and one of your subpersonalities does that, they would say, what are you talking about? So that's why I use the word part, because it's the most user-friendly word. All of us, usually every day, say some version of, one part of me wants to do this, another part isn't up for that. So it's just common parlance. It's not the best word. It's kind of like the machine part, it's not very descriptive, but it's very useful in therapy. So in a few minutes, I can help a client identify a handful of parts. And then at some point, I'll say, we just identified all these different parts inside of you. Is there one you'd like to get to know or do some work with? And they'll pick one. And they pick what I think might be an exile, I'll say, we'll get to that, but first I want to see if there's any fear about going to that vulnerable place or going to it with me. And so then we'll solicit the protectors, because we tend to start with protectors first, which is something I learned the hard way, because I used to try to go to exiles as soon as possible, because that seemed like what needed the healing the most. And my clients taught me that that was very dangerous to them, because they would have big backlash reactions afterwards. So one of the things I'm trying to contribute to things like EMDR and other systems that do tend to bypass protectors, including psychedelics, is to work with protectors first and go over all their fears. And there are common fears protectors have about going to exiles, and we've gotten good at being able to address those fears and solicit permission. But we don't go to exiles without the permission of the protectors. So anyway, that's how we get started usually.
Okay. And I wonder if that also helps answer this question. Luciana asks, how do you achieve getting through to the parts?
Again, maybe I'll hold that one until the exercise, because
Sure.
we'll do where everybody will try and do that.
Yeah. And Maddie asks, based on what you've shared about IFS, I imagine that any personality disorder is reversible, even antisocial personality disorder, which is commonly deemed incurable. Have you found that to be true? Does it require healthy relationships outside of therapy?
Well, there's two questions there. I'll answer the first one first. So, yes, the answer is yes. So, as I was working this model in the early days, you know, I consider myself a scientist, so I was really trying to test how potent it was, and I saw that it could work for this bulimic population of kids with bulimia, but I didn't know how it would work with other kinds of clients. And so for about 20 years, I actively recruited the toughest cases I could find. And so I wound up doing a lot of work with what people would call, if you like the DSM, borderline personality and DID and so on and so on. And yes, you need to adapt, and it's different with those clients, and including the clients that get written off so much, like the one she mentioned. And yeah, their protectors are strong, and their protectors often take longer to give permission, and you often have to do what I call direct access more, where I would say, let me talk to that part directly rather than have the self. Because with a lot of those clients, their protectors aren't going to let them access self for quite a while. And for good reasons, you know, that these protectors are very suspicious of people, including therapists, and particularly men a lot of the time. So I would have to earn their trust. And so I would just spend lots of time doing direct access with protectors, trying to form trusting relationships with them. And then at some point ask if they'd be willing to open space inside. And when they were, it was the same damn self that would pop out in them as popped out in everybody else, which is what began to convince me that itself is universal and it's not, you know, attachment based. And so as part of all of that exploration, I consulted to a treatment center for sex offenders for 3 years and did a lot of work with young men and teenagers who had done these horrible things to kids and also had raped women. And so that was a real test. If I go to these parts, are even those parts not bad? And turns out that's true, because each of them would share their secret histories of how they got forced into the roles they were in and how they carried the perpetrator's energy to protect the system from the perpetrator, and how they had this, as a result, desire to hurt vulnerability, which would team up with their sexual parts. So that convinced me that there are no bad parts, which is the title of my latest book. And that people with these heavy duty diagnoses that our field writes off are just, their protectors are just more intense. But if offered the chance, there are no protectors that don't want out of their jobs if they think it's safe.
It truly tests compassion.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
And that, as you can see, I'm not a fan of the DSM.
Mhm.
Me, it's a fairly accurate description of clusters of protectors. That's all it is.
So Rome, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, is asking, how do you approach someone who uses parts as an excuse for abuse or poor behavior or narcissist specifically? So it might reflect back on the last question.
Yeah, so that's most narcissists. That's most, most offenders will have a part that is desperate to excuse their behavior. And a lot of times, because it's polarized with the part that's so shaming of them all the time. And so if they can't take in any accountability, because if they do, that shaming part just jumps on it and tears them apart even more. And so there's a defending part all the time to hold that back. And so that's what you're going to run into initially as you encounter these people. And so again, it takes time for that defending part to trust that you're not going to be judging the person for what they did, and to then give you access to that shaming part so you can help it lighten up, at which point the defending part can lighten up, at which point then you can start to get access to the exiles that are driving the whole thing.
Wow. And would you like to take a few more questions? We have about 12 more questions, so it's up to you how many more.
Yeah, let's go with 2 more.
Okay. So at some point, if appropriate, could you speak to the difference between fear and anxiety? My impression is that fear is a somatic-based response to threat. I've been thinking about anxiety as basically mentally induced. Perhaps this is a part.
Well, they're both parts. Well, they're both burdens. They're not parts. There are parts that carry those burdens. And yeah, anxiety is more often carried by a protector who is watching all the time for danger and anticipating that things are going to go badly, and just kind of worried all the time, and is afraid if it doesn't worry all the time, something bad's going to happen. But it's protecting exiles who sit in the fear, who are stuck in the scene and carry all the terror of that time. So that would be the way I would describe that difference.
Okay, great. And for our last question, this is another one from Key. In encouraging clients to engage with their protectors, how do you manage the impact of effects of trauma, retriggering, dysregulation, and/or dissociation?
Okay, so I'm going to make some radical statements. There's no such thing as dissociation. dissociation is the activity of a protector. So if I'm with a client and they start to dissociate, I don't try to do the grounding skills or any of that. I say, let me talk to the part that just took you out. And so then I'll say, okay, so you just took her out. What are you afraid would have happened had you not done that? And they'll answer it. Usually they're afraid this exile is going to take over. And I'll say, okay, I understand that. I get you have good reasons to not let that happen. But if you give us a chance, I can show you we can do the work without that exile taking over, and we can actually heal it, which will then allow you to not have to do this dissociating thing anymore. And most of those parts are eager for that to happen, and they give us permission. So, and dysregulation, I think, was the other one.
Yeah, dysregulation and retriggering trauma.
Yeah, so retriggering trauma simply means your exiles got triggered and you're dysregulated, quote unquote, because they've taken over, they've blended with you. And you're feeling all that feelings that you've tried your best all your life to not feel, or your client is. And that's very scary to protectors. So they're getting increasingly agitated and they're at extreme, and that's called dysregulation. But that's all it is. And the good news about all of this, as I was describing with the dissociating part, is it's all negotiable because these parts have agency. So, for example, if I am working with somebody and suddenly they are, quote unquote, dysregulated because an exile has popped out because the protector did relax, and they look like they're having a panic attack, or they look like they're having, like they're having some kind of emotional pain. It's very intense. Again, I don't do the, window of tolerance. You got to ground yourself, all that, because that just tells the part, get out of here. You don't belong. I would say, can I talk to this part that's just taken over? And again, I would say, okay, so you're here and you're in a lot of pain or you're in a lot of fear, and we get that. And we're going to help you. And it would help us help you if you wouldn't mind pulling your energy out of her just a little bit so she can be with you too, instead of totally be blended with you. And if they believe what you're saying, and you say it with this kind of confidence, then the client will suddenly say, yeah, I see that part now, rather than I am that part now. And then we can start to do some work with that. And so, yeah, it's, again, this is so hard to convey to therapists new to this, because you've been so socialized to believe all these terms that, like dysregulation and dissociation and all of that, as pathological processes, but they're not. They're just the activity of parts that can be negotiated with.
Great. Apologies for all the questions that we haven't gotten to. And so, Richard, I'll hand it back over to you. What would you like to do next?
Yeah, so I think I keep hinting at this exercise. So I think we'll go ahead and do that.
Okay.
I think it'll help with all these questions. So feel free not to do it if you want to just kind of zone out for a few minutes. But if you're up for this, I'm going to invite you first to think of a protector that you have an attitude about, you don't like it, to what it does to you. If you can't think of one, God bless you, but also most of us have a critic of some kind. So you could pick that one. So take a second, and I'll give you another second or two to come up with a protector. And then once you do, go ahead and focus on it, however you experience it. So if it's a thought pattern or emotion or a sensation or a voice, just zoom your attention in on that part of you exclusively for a second. And also see if it seems to be located somewhere in your body or around your body. So focus on it and then notice where in or around your body it seems to be broadcasting from or mostly located. And then if you have that anchor point, then go ahead and I'm going to have you direct some questions to it. So the first question for this protector is, what does it want you to know about itself? And don't think of the answer, just wait and see if something comes back from that place. And if nothing comes back, that's okay. But don't try and figure it out. Just wait and see what comes. What does this part want you to know about itself? And a second question, what's it afraid would happen if it didn't do this inside of you? If it answered that one, you probably learned about how it's trying to protect you. Maybe you learned about other parts that it's trying to protect or parts that it's trying to contain. And if that's true, then see if you can extend some appreciation to it for at least trying to keep you safe that way. And see how it reacts to your appreciation. And then ask it this: if you could go to the part it protects or is trying to contain, and you could heal or change that part, so this protector was freed up from this responsibility, what might it like to do instead inside of you? I'll repeat that because that was a little complicated. If you could heal or change the parts that it protects inside of you, so it was liberated from this role, what might it like to do instead? Again, don't think, just wait and see what comes back. Then ask the part how old it thinks you are. Not how old is it, but how old does it think you are? And if it got that wrong, then go ahead and update it and see how it reacts to that update. And then the last question for it is, what does it need from you going forward? What does it need from you? Whenever that feels complete, you can begin to shift your focus back out here. As you do that, Kira is going to pair you up with somebody. So you'll have, each of you will have 3 or 4 minutes to talk about your experience before we bring you back. And if you didn't have much of an experience, you can just get to know your partner a little bit. And then we'll come back and talk as a group about it.